Hi, I'm Brett Bannor. I'm the manager of animal collections at the Atlanta History Center, where I take care of sheep, goats, chickens, and turkeys. I have an extensive background in animal care. My college degree was in zoology, and so I've made use of that. And also in the History Center, it also is an opportunity to incorporate my interest in animals with my interest in American history. Well, I've always had a keen interest in animals, and mostly it was wild animals, but I had the opportunity over 20 years ago to start taking care of some sheep and goats at a zoo. And I became very interested in them, especially when it was obvious to me that there was an extensive story to be told about the significance of sheep to the development of the United States of America. Maybe the most interesting thing is the sheer numbers of sheep that we had in this country. You know, it's so common when people will come back to the United States from trips to Ireland or New Zealand or Australia, and they'll say, oh, well, they have more sheep there than people. Well, as late as 1840, the United States had more sheep than people. And the number of sheep actually kept increasing through the 19th century, but not fast enough to keep pace with the human population. Thus, we wound up having more people than sheep. And that also brought into the focus of my research how much wool was imported to this country.
All right. Whoa, gee, it got really quiet. This is weird. Trey, is this what you do every time? All right. How's everybody doing this afternoon? This afternoon. My name is Jordan Duncan. I'm the program manager here at the Bartow History Museum. I'm about to introduce a fantastic person here that's going to has a great talk for you. But before I do that, I have a few upcoming announcements for some of the stuff we have going on at the museum. For any of you out there that have kiddos or grandkiddos, we are currently having our Spooky Museum event. So upstairs, our museum exhibit is decorated for Halloween in some fun, spooky decorations. And we also have a companion scavenger hunt to go along with it. You just have to check in. Yep. You just got to check in at the front desk, and it's free with your museum admission. And if you complete the scavenger hunt, you might get a Halloween treat at the end. Who's to say? On October 25th, which is going to be a Saturday, in conjunction with the Booths West Fest, we are going to be holding a sheep to shawl event here. Right, our friend right here, Leslie Bronson, will in her spinning group right over here, will be demonstrating a lot of from sheep to shawl, hence the name. So definitely look on our website for those details. If you are a member, you do get in free for the Bartow History Museum side. However, if you'd like to take part in the additional West Fest, it is a ticket through the booth. So just a heads up on that. Thursday, October 30th is going to be our evening lecture. And that's going to be me. I will be giving the evening lecture. So if you are getting in the Halloween spirit and you want to hear some local legends, folklore, and ghost stories, I guess I'm your guy. So we'll be talking about ghost stories of Bartow County, but also just some in North Georgia as well. So definitely come out and check that out. Saturday, November 8th is just as quickly as Halloween comes and goes. November 8th is going to be our old-fashioned Christmas. Santa's going to come and visit the museum and take some pictures with the kiddos. Definitely check out our website for details on that because photo packages have been selling out very quick this year. So definitely check that out and reserve your time. And lastly, before we get to the introductions, on November 22nd, it's going to be the Saturday before Thanksgiving. We are going to have a book signing here that evening from 7 to 8. We're going to have a Taste of Georgia. It's a couple of authors from South Carolina are going to come and talk about their book. It's going to be more of like a community chat, moderated panel about their book, about the history of Georgia foodways all the way from the coast on upwards into Georgia. So definitely come out and check that out. We will have books on hand for that. for that evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce a former colleague and a friend of mine, Mr. Brett Bannor, right here. Brett Bannor works at the Atlanta History Center. He is the manager of the animal/living collections. There have been many times where we've been working out on the Smith farm and we've just walked sheep, right?
Yeah.
And played around the sheep. Brett tends to sheep, goats, turkeys, roosters, hens, and he just recently, about a year ago, had this fantastic book released called American Sheep, A Cultural History. So without further ado, Mr. Brett Bannor, as the book falls.
Oh, hopefully that's not an omen. Well, thank you for that, George.
You're very welcome.
Now, and there's my book also, American Sheep, A Cultural History, for sale at the Mount Vernon gift shop. I think it's a very nice touch that the people there put it in a display surrounded by wool. Not to brag, but the book has received some good reviews, critical acclaim. Thank you very much, Washington Post. But I drove up here today in my 2015 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it. The takeaway from this is that it is a different thing to write a critically acclaimed book as it is to write a best-selling book. Now let's see if I can find it. Okay, here are some of the sheep at the Atlanta History Center. And what's important about this slide is on the left here, that's Buster, and the middle here, that's Hercules. And you will notice that, and they're both boys, and you will notice Buster does not have horns, Hercules does have horns. I can't tell you how many times people will come to the History Center or anywhere there's sheep and, oh, if it has horns, it's a male. If it doesn't have horns, it's a female. No, you can't tell by the presence or absence of horns. So if you get nothing else out of this talk, that's something that you'll learn. You won't come to the History Center and say, okay, that one must be a male because it has horns. Now, and Jordan asked if I could bring a sheep, okay? Couldn't bring one of these, so I brought Clementina, my little pretend sheep, who is much easier to take care of. Mostly she just sits on my shoulder as we watch TV together. So Clementina is here. And when I began researching and writing American Sheep, A Cultural History, there were a lot of times I said to myself, I never thought that the project would lead to this. For example, I never thought I would be writing a bunch of emails to get permission to reproduce a 1940s advertisement of a woman in a bathing suit. This is from Vogue magazine, and thanks to Duncan, Jordan, I'll call you by last name. Right. Jordan, I just learned 20 minutes ago that the first editor of Vogue was from this area? Yeah. Okay. Now, what's the significance of this? Well, look what her suit is made of. Wool moderne. This is from the 1940s. Synthetic fabrics were in their infancy, okay? And so if the only choices for a bathing suit were gonna be wool or cotton, natural fibers, well, wool would be a better bet because it doesn't absorb water as much. But from the standpoint of education, the significance of this is that when people come to a place where there's sheep with their children, and say, now what does a sheep say? Bah! Okay, and they say, and they shear the sheep and they take the wool and they make sweaters. That's all they can think of to say that we use wool for is sweaters. Okay, and the child learns that, oh, well, we wear sweaters when it's chilly out. So they immediately get that thought of it as being something that you only wear when it's cold. But, you know, there was a time when people were wearing bathing suits made out of wool. I don't know any women today who wear wool bathing suits. I know some women who are sheepish about wearing a bathing suit. You know, it is the animal that lends itself best to puns, probably. Now, in 1776, you might even wear wool in the middle of summer, as these gentlemen are doing. And this is from John Trumbull's famous painting, of course, where the committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence is handing in their work. Remember, it's 1776. We're still about a decade and a half away from the cotton gin. So cotton is very scarce and limited availability, so people were wearing wool. And give yourself a star if you can name all 5 of the men on the committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence. Okay, everybody knows, guy who sent in, Thomas Jefferson, here's John Adams, here's Ben Franklin, and here's the 2 nobody can remember. This is Roger Sherman, and this guy pushed in the back in the painting and pretty much in history is Robert Livingston. Now, Robert Livingston, when he's remembered today, if he is remembered, he's remembered for 3 things. One is for being on the part of the committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence. 2, it was Mr. Livingston who swore in George Washington as our first president. And 3, he was the prime mover in negotiating the treaty that brought the Louisiana Purchase to the United States. But for me, he's always going to be known more for a 4th thing. He wrote a book about sheep. So how about that? I actually have something in common with somebody who was on the Declaration of Independence Committee. And it was a book. Don't let the title Essay on Sheep fool you, because whereas today we look at an essay as being a short piece, any kind of expository writing there could be called an essay. This was actually a book that was, I think, 198 pages or something like that. So yeah, 190 pages. And here's my favorite quote from the book. That we are not at this moment fierce, savage, and brutal is probably owing to the domestication of sheep. This little animal, then, in losing its old wild nature, has converted the savage into the man. So what Livingston is doing here is saying that sheep civilized us. And Daisy, one of my sheep, is given this response. But while Mr. Livingston is unique among America's founders in producing an entire book on sheep, the letters of almost all of the founders are full of references to sheep. This is especially true with Washington and Jefferson. Now remember, they were, in addition to statesmen, they were farmers, and in both of those areas, the culture of wool in this country was very important to them. And earlier I mentioned that I thought to myself many times, I never imagined the roads my research would lead me down. I did not know that in writing a book about sheep, I'd be consulting biographies of people like Henry Ford and Grover Cleveland, but at least I'd heard of them before I began the project. But in doing this research, I met figures from history I hadn't heard of, like Alexander Wayman. Now, Wayman was a 19th century AME minister. In the 1880s, he published his memoirs, and one vivid recollection he had was of hearing the sermon of another AME minister who came through his town when he was a boy. Even though they lived in Maryland at that time, Wayman and his family were free people of color. Now, Wayman could not remember whether that reverend who gave the speech that inspired him, the sermon that inspired him, visited in 1826 or 1827, but he knew whichever year it was, the month of the visit was May. How did he remember that? It was because he recalled that when the minister arrived in town, little Alexander and his father were off shearing their sheep, which they always did in May. This shows us how significant an event the shearing was to the Wayman family. And again, they were free, so these were their sheep. They weren't shearing for a master. Of course, mostly in the South before the Civil War, African Americans were shearing in service to white enslavers. One of the regrets I have in writing my book is the dearth of first-hand accounts by shepherds who were people of color. Now, the connection between sheep and slavery is far stronger than just the existence of enslaved shepherds. Sheep are key players in a major economic and political story of the antebellum era. And since it's a grim story, let's at least have a couple of cute lambs on the screen. Throughout the 19th century, tariffs, that is taxes on imported materials and goods, were a major issue. You may have heard of the 1828 Tariff of Abominations and the nullification crisis that followed. These events are discussed in numerous books on the history of the period and typically framed as part of the growing animosity in the United States that ultimately turned to war in 1861. But rarely do you see specified that the imported item most often discussed in tariff debates in Congress was raw wool. Why the rancor over sheep fleeces? Well, wool can broadly be categorized as coarse, middling, or fine based on the quality, with coarse being the lowest quality, fine being top-notch, and middling being the common stuff that's between them. Now, when I go to buy hay, alfalfa, straw, feed for our sheep, I can guarantee you the people at the feed store do not ask me, well, what's the quality like of your sheep's wool? We charge based on that. No. You're going to pay the same amount for your hay or anything else, whether your sheep have low-quality wool or high-quality wool. It's going to cost you the same amount of money to build a barn as if your sheep have low-quality wool or high-quality wool. The shear is going to charge you the same. No difference. So the amount you spend on your sheep is the same, whatever the condition of the wool. But remember, the key to getting the best quality of wool possible is the key to all domestication of animals, careful selected breeding of individual stock possessing the desired qualities. And the better the quality of the wool, the more profitable it is to you because you can sell it at a higher price. American shepherds at this time, before the Civil War, were mostly in the northern states. They wanted to maximize profits as much as possible, and they were very serious about their selective breeding, and thus American sheep almost exclusively had either middling or fine wool, no coarse wool. And of course, the plantation owners in the South did not want to pay for fine or even middling wool to clothe their enslaved. They wanted coarse wool, the cheapest kind, the sort of wool that wasn't being produced by American sheep. And so huge quantities of wool were imported into the United States from Turkey and southern South America. In those places, the sheep were not selectively managed, and with all that indiscriminate breeding among the flocks, wool was never improved and always stayed at a very coarse quality. Interestingly, the wool from Turkey was often called Smyrna wool. That's not the Smyrna near here. That's because that's the name of the port. The city that now is called Izmir was then Smyrna. And the South American wool was called Buenos Aires wool for the same reason, after the port of export. But whichever of these two places it came from, the wool was often tellingly called Negro cloth. The coarse wool was imported by the firms that ran the factories, mostly in New England, where it was processed into finished cloth, which was then purchased by the plantation owners of the South to be made into garments for the enslaved. And of course, while the tariff was paid by the factory owners, they passed the cost on to the purchasers in the form of higher prices. Now you can see why the Southern congressmen had such a strong desire for the wool tariff to be as low as possible, and they resented the desire of many Northern congressmen to have higher tariffs. That was the big tariff debate, is the tariffs on wool. Now, if anyone were to ask you to connect cotton to slavery in the antebellum world economy, I'm sure you could do it. You'd point out that the cotton was grown in the South with slave labor, sent to factories in the US and Europe, and made into clothing for the masses. Now, if you couldn't do so already, you can connect wool to slavery in the antebellum economy, but note that the chain is reversed with the enslaved people at the end of the link. Again, sheep in Turkey and South America were shorn, their wool was sent to American factories, and the finished cloth was sold to the plantations to be made into clothing, especially for the enslaved. Now, I should mention again that there were some sheep here in the South. I mean, most of the sheep were up north at this time. There were still some sheep in the South, and often their shepherds were enslaved people. But usually the southern sheep were merinos or other breeds producing high quality wool. So when the enslaved shepherds sheared the sheep, it wasn't for wool used to clothe them. Mostly it was often a product that was sold for profit. When the Civil War came, among the many advantages the Union had over the Confederacy was that the northern states had far more sheep and thus a better supply of wool to make military uniforms. And the figures for how much wool was consumed are staggering. In 1864, the Union Army used about 75 million pounds of wool. So that's a lot of sheep. The Confederacy, facing a wool shortage, made uniforms composed of what was called jean cloth, and it was a blend of wool and cotton. This Confederate uniform is in the collection at the Atlanta History Center, and in this close-up, you can actually see the cotton in a spot where a moth larva has eaten away the wool. And do you know what? Just in making this talk up just a few weeks ago, I noticed, son of a gun, this was reproduced upside down in the book. I mean, this picture, I mean, yeah, almost a year later, I just happened to notice, oh, it's upside down. Yes.
You didn't tell them back then, you know, you were looking at
yeah.
the big picture, you get the big picture.
Yeah, well, I wish this was the worst mistake that happened in the book. I got a date wrong, and my brother noticed it, and so, you know, getting a date wrong and having your own brother point it out, you know, it's. So anyway, since we're talking about sheep, I should probably say something about shearing. Here is a very old pair of hand shears. You can all pass this around later if you like. Now, some shears still use these, but there's the option to use powered shears, such as we see here. Notice the shears are plugged into that extension cord, which you can't see, but the extension cord goes around and is plugged into an outlet in our barn. Now, in our time, we might take this for granted, but when I tell you that the first powered shears were made in 1887, can you look at these hand tools and can you look at that and see the technology gap? Okay, in 1887, nobody was plugging those things into an outlet in the barn, which meant when you hear powered shears and it's the late 19th century, what you're talking about is devices that are self-contained, big devices that in terms of energy to operate are entirely self-contained. And I wish this had come out better, but this photo is an enlargement from an advertisement in the December 1907 American Sheep Breeder and Wool Grower magazine. And that's a blow up. It's a little hard to see in here. That's the machine in the middle. Each gentleman has a sheep. And here is the complete slide for the Stewart Little Wonder. Now, if you can't read the text, it says that it consists of a high-grade 2-horsepower gasoline engine directly connected to 2 latest improved Stewart power shearing machines. And incidentally, the use of gasoline shows that this is a second-generation machine. The earlier machines of this type were steam-powered. And it's portable. It says, the copy of the ad tells us that you can carry it from flock to flock in a buggy if you like. You're invited to send a postal for a catalog. They didn't provide a website, unfortunately. And the Chicago Flexible Shaft Company, by the way, later became Sunbeam, making toasters and electric toothbrushes. And I hope this, you can see this, okay, here's the machine, and see how there's an arm coming out, and it comes down to this, what's behind his hand here. This is like what we call a powered shear today, is just the clipper thing with the plug. Okay, in that time, here's the clipper thing, but instead of a plug, it goes up into this big gas-powered engine. And that was, in 1907, powered shears. We didn't get the ones that you can just plug in into your friendly neighborhood outlet until much later in the 19th century, into the 20th century. I was thinking, when I think of this is 1907, and it's a few years after the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk, and here they are using this kind of machine to shear the sheep. Now, let me grab some water here. So, humans need to drink more often than sheep do.
Why does it say that you can turn off from 200 to 400 sheep? Do they mean like turn over? Is that a term, turn off?
I'm guessing that's kind of just the way they would have said it in 1907, that you can shear. That's a good question. Why didn't they just say, and enables them to shear from 200 to 400 sheep a day?
Term they used to turn off sheep.
Yeah.
What about was the, I assume with electric clippers, the yield of wool per sheep was higher because they could get really close to the skin, or?
That's, there's some contention about that because, and I kind of get into that in the book, because there were plenty of people who said, oh, this is nonsense. I can get more wool with the hand clippers than I can with this. And there were also people who expressed concern. They said, you know what, this is taking it down too low. Yeah. And there were initially safety concerns also. It's not just for the sheep, but also for the shearer. Yeah. But I think in the competitive that they do some places, they still use the hand shears. Oh, really? And there's people who just swear by that. It's whether you like the mechanized ones or the hand-powered ones. But the inventor, by the way, of the first powered shearing machine, the one I mentioned, 1887, was Frederick York Wolseley. Yes, his last name was Wolseley. He was an Irishman who emigrated to Australia. Now imagine the hurdles he's got to overcome to build his wonderful shearing machine. He must figure out how to have a reliable power source that will turn various gears and cause blades to spin so the sheep can be sheared without blowing anybody up, right? At the same time he's doing this, over in Germany, Gottlieb Daimler and Carl Benz were working on a similar problem: how to have a reliable power source that will turn various gears and cause wheels on the underside of a cart to propel that cart forward, again, without blowing anybody up. This is another thing I didn't know I'd be thinking about when I began this project, how closely related the invention of powered sheep shears and automobiles was. I bet it won't surprise you in the least to know that Frederick Wolseley's operation, the Wolseley Sheep Shearing Machine Company, soon began making cars as well. Now, compared to Ford or Chevrolet, I think Wolseley Sheep Shearing Machine Company is kind of a long name to put on the back plate of each vehicle. And, much as I like sheep, I don't want the word sheep on the back of my car, not when I drive in Atlanta where everybody else drives like wolves. And by the way, the Wolseley Sheep Shearing Machine Company still exists, although because of mergers and other changes, it's now Ferguson Enterprises, a distributor of plumbing and HVAC supplies. Now, let's go out west. This slide...
Excuse me, was there ever a close-up of the actual shearing machine?
Not one that I could access easily. I mean, I had to use that image for the book. There was a better one that the folks at Getty were going to insist I had to pay a lot of money for. Now, if you want to go to Getty Images website and sheep shearing machine, and it'll come up. But going out west here, this slide tells us how many sheep there were in the western states and territories in 1880. 19.25 million. Those were some big flocks. And this slide tells you how many cattle there are by comparison. Does this surprise many of you? Did you envision an Old West with far more cattle than sheep? What is the reason for this popular misconception? Here are two 19th century gentlemen who wrote extensively about the West. That's Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President of the United States on the left, and John Muir, the famous conservationist, on the right. Muir was employed for a while as a shepherd in Yosemite Valley, and he grew to dislike sheep very much, mainly because he was concerned about the damage their grazing did to the environment. Roosevelt never was a shepherd, but he was a prominent cattleman, and he despised sheep, calling them woolly idiots in one of his books. But he didn't stop there. He questioned the manhood of the shepherds. Now, there's a bit of an irony to this because it's clear, given the time and place and the style here, both these men are wearing wool in this picture. Now, at least Roosevelt and John Muir mention sheep in their writings, but two other prominent chroniclers of the West, historian Frederick Jackson Turner and fiction writer Owen Wister, didn't mention sheep at all in their writings, although they did have much to say about cattle. Owen Wister is famous for his 1902 novel, The Virginian. Now, the title, Virginian, refers to the main character. It actually was set in late 19th century Wyoming. The significance of the novel is that it's widely considered the origin of that whole genre of literature about the Old West. And once movies and television came along, that was translated into those mediums. In fact, some of you may remember, there was a 1960s TV Western called The Virginian, loosely based on Wister's book. Now, Wister ignoring the abundance of sheep in the West meant that the stories, films, and TV shows influenced by the genre he started inevitably depicted a West in which cattle dominated. So we saw there were a lot more sheep. But why? Why the ignoring of sheep? Now, I've given facts to this point. Now I'm going to give my conclusion based on the evidence. Remember that Theodore Roosevelt questioned the masculinity of shepherds. He, along with Frederick Jackson Turner and Owen Wister, wanted to emphasize the manliness of the West. And in most of the imagery of Western culture, not just the geographic American West, presents cattle as the masculine livestock, sheep as the feminine livestock. Think of the cowboy riding the range. Note that he's called the cowboy, not a sheep boy. Think of the bullfighting matador or the running of the bulls in Spain. Think of bull riding at a rodeo. By contrast, the image of sheep being smaller, more docile animals tends to be feminine. Mary had a little lamb, little Bo Peep lost her sheep. Bo sounds like a good name for a cowboy, but if you call him Bo Peep, he'll probably slug you. And there is no running of the sheep in Spain precisely because the participants don't have the thrill associated with risk, although, you might get a rash if you brush across a sheep and you got a wool allergy. So I conclude that what we're dealing with here is a bit of gender bias. The mostly male writers of conditions in the West in the late 19th century emphasized cattle and de-emphasized or ignored the more numerous sheep because those writers wanted to stress the masculine aspects of the region. Now let's go with one more story about the West. And since it's a sad story too, let's have another picture of a cute lamb. That's Hercules as a lamb.
I miss Hercules.
Yeah. Oh, he's
large guys. He's a big boy.
Yeah. He's still with us. See, Hercules and Buster, I was telling Jordan earlier, are now 12 and a half years old, bless them. That's a ripe old age for sheep, but they're still doing well. So anyway, in the early 1980s, scientists and veterinarians conducted an experiment. They placed 6 sheep in a fenced 5-acre enclosure. All 6 sheep were deemed normally healthy by veterinarians before they were placed in the pen. All these animals were still fine a year later when 6 new sheep, also pronounced healthy by the veterinarians, were added to the flock. So now we got a dozen sheep. Within the next month, 5 of the 6 sheep from the first group were dead. The 6th one perished a couple of months later. Meanwhile, all 6 sheep from that second group were alive and still healthy. What happened? Well, I haven't yet given you the critical detail about the experiment. Those first 6 sheep, the ones that died, were not domestic animals. Instead, they were our wild Native American sheep, popularly called the Rocky Mountain sheep or the bighorn. The second group was 6 domestic sheep. I think it's widely known that when European humans came to these shores, vast numbers of the indigenous people perished because they succumbed to diseases contracted from the Europeans, illnesses they had no immunity to. Well, the same thing happened when domestic sheep from Europe came into contact with our Native American animals. Specifically, the disease responsible is acute hemorrhagic pneumonia, and the problem persists. In 1997, wildlife biologists studying bighorn living in the Terriol and Kenosha Mountains of central Colorado began finding carcasses of bighorns that had died of pneumonia. And up to this point, they'd never seen bighorns that had, dead bighorns, anything else other than the remains of a kill by the mountain lions. And in those 6 years of the study, they'd never seen any domestic sheep, but soon they saw one, just one stray animal that had come into contact with their native flocks of bighorns. And 86 wild bighorns died from contact with this one stray domestic sheep. For this reason, the management plans for bighorn put out by the Departments of Conservation in Colorado, Wyoming, and other western states that bighorn inhabit stress that there must be what they term effective separation between every viable flock of the native bighorn and any domestic sheep. There's no uniformly accepted definition for effective separation, but obviously, the more miles you have between bighorn sheep and their domestic cousins, the better it is that we'll be able to maintain the flocks of the native bighorn sheep. Now, on Saturday afternoons between 2 and 3, I take our sheep for walks around campus. It's an offering we call Beyond the Barnyard. And when I took this picture recently of Maribel on a walk, I was struck by how much it looked like she was saying, "Please come visit the Atlanta History Center. We've got a lot of fascinating things to see, but none more remarkable than us sheep." So I'll extend Maribel's invitation to all of you. Thank you very much.
Now, would she go out there and try to eat that grass? Do they like green grass?
Do you know what's funny is our sheep are very individualistic when they go out on walks. Maribel is more like, what's that? Daisy, who's another one her age, is like, let's go. She's pulling me along. Let's go. These people want to talk to you, Daisy. No, let's go. But Buster, who's older, is really great because he'll stop in front of the museum and stand there for 20 minutes and let people pet him. But as far as what they want to eat when they're out walking, mostly they do not show a lot of interest in the green grass. They do show an awful lot of interest in fallen leaves. When I walk them past our chicken coop has netting over it. So each morning I knock any fallen leaves out to the front. And so when we pass by and there's all these fallen leaves in a chicken coop, they're like little vacuum cleaners picking them up. But she's just not, and really none of them really show that much interest in the actual green grass grazing. They will when I walk them in places where there's just weeds and things. It's like, oh yeah, that's for us. So.
Now, what about black sheep? I've heard the term black sheep. Is there such a thing as a black sheep?
Oh yeah.
And do they still raise them for black wool, or is it?
Well, the reason the term came about is because if a sheep was born black, that sheep was going to be dinner. The wool quality on a black sheep could be as good as the wool quality on a white sheep. The problem is when you got the sheep that have the nice, pure white color, you can dye it any color you want.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's already black, you got black wool. You can't really
Yeah, but back
do
in
anything
the,
else with it.
back in the day,
Wool
there was a
was
lot, there was all the men's suits were black, everything was black as far as cloth.
That-
So you didn't have,
Good question, but even with that, even with the need for black for suits, it was not valued the same.
Superstition, probably.
Superstition too. That could be.
So they're pretty rare now, like to have a black sheep?
It's it depends on what the level of selective breeding is, and even today with things. And this I should mention that since the Maribel here, like all our sheep, she's a Gulf Coast sheep, and this is sometimes called the Gulf Coast native sheep, or sometimes we'll just get abbreviated native sheep. And of course, it's not native. They originally came from Europe. As we saw, our native sheep are the bighorn that live out west. But the reason it got native sheep on it was because they had been here so long. They're descended from the sheep that the first Spanish explorers brought in the 16th century. And so when they started bringing in the early 19th century, merinos and other what they called improved breeds, they thought of the Gulf Coast as being native sheep because they'd been here so long. But anyway, that's a roundabout way of saying that our other Gulf Coast sheep are white. You might not know looking at them because they'll get dirty lying in the wool, but when you pull the wool apart, you see, oh, look how pure white it is there. And of course, when you wash it, it's this pure white. But once in a while with Gulf Coast, you get these ones that have the brown face and brown legs and kind of the brownish tinge to the wool. And I think what happens now is that with a heritage breed like this, where people are raising them, and they do economically things with them, like the folks we have purchased our sheep from, they've sold sheep both for slaughter and for wool, but also there's a hobbying aspect to it that, now I've got one with the badger face, they call, where it's got this face except with this big black mark right in the middle. And so I think they probably, in this day and age, where it was desired and considering what we know about genetics, yes, I would say you could get to the point where your number of black sheep would be pretty low. I don't know that you could ever get it absolutely to zero. But it's like with domestication of the chickens. People may not initially realize you buy a dozen eggs. Okay, those eggs were laid by a dozen different chickens because they can only lay one egg a day. So, that's a dozen chickens, but the genetics, the selective breeding is to the point that they are so identical that they're producing eggs that just look absolutely indistinguishable from the next one. Whereas like we have heritage breeds of chickens, and it's like, oh, this one must have come from, this came from Reba, and this one came from, because we can tell the different hens will have slightly different size or shapes or colors on their eggs.
So, I know that the sheep need to be sheared. Are they cooperative with the shearing? Like, are they excited to get sheared? Or are they kind of jerks?
Yes. I don't know if I could say that they're excited to be sheared. They're obviously very happy once it comes off. And our shearer, gee, can I get way back to that slide with, oh, there it is. Scott Fuss, our shearer, is so good that, he gets them. And sometimes, and this is kind of funny, I took that's Buster, by the way, getting sheared. And I looked at them and said, oh, I forgot that he could do Buster like that, because Buster is so cooperative, they can just get him down. What Scott will do with a lot of the others is he'll lean back on the barn like this and lean the sheep back and then start. And generally, the sheep will be cooperative as long as its feet are not touching the ground, or you. You know, if the foot touches, the hoof touches anything other than air, then they'll start flailing around. But it is very individualistic. We also have Angora goats, and our Angora goats are sheared twice a year. The sheep just once in the spring, but the Angora goats got their fall shearing just a couple of weeks ago, and Dorothy, the female, was just, and then Claude, her twin brother, was sheared and was totally quiet. But Dorothy then started howling because her brother's getting sheared. and actually, the shearers told me that, said, I can tell that these goats are with you and are around people a lot. And she told me they'll put more of a fuss than a goat or sheep they bring out from the field, because the goat who's with you all this time is like, how can you be doing this to me? I thought we were friends. To the sheep from the field that's just is just so scared, you know, and just sitting there while it's being sheared. And so, but they can be individuals when it comes to shearing.
What do y'all do with your wool?
What's that?
So the more sheep is around you, the more mouthy they get. Or a
In Dorothy's case, yes.
goat. Wow, these guys are great.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for you. So I've got a memory of like August of 2019, because you know that whenever we would start the school year at the Atlanta History Center, that would be like our month to rebone up on a lot of the field trips that we were given. And I remember that we were in the theater one day and you were given a presentation on the sheep and the goats. At that time, did you know that all that information that you were, the research that you were doing for that training you were giving us would become part of this book project? The book, see, he expects me to remember something I was doing in 2019. I don't remember what I did yesterday. Actually, I've started pretty much researching the book in 2018, so it was a year earlier. What happened was originally, it's that wonderful thing that they've done now is taking the papers of 6 of the founders, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton, and they've got them online. You know, it's got, wow, this is great. And so it's like, you know what I'm gonna do? Enter sheep as a key word for the search. Enter wool as a key word. And just, my goodness, they were talking about sheep a lot. You know, we don't expect, these men were presidents. You know, our presidents don't talk much about sheep today. You know, I haven't heard Trump say anything about sheep. I never heard Biden say anything about sheep. I never heard Obama say anything about sheep, you know. But so this, I wrote an article that appeared in the Journal of the American Revolution just on sheep in the Revolutionary era. And just as I thought, wow, there's more of a story to this. I mean, I just kept on going and just finding out things. I mean, just finding out that Grover Cleveland in his 1887 annual message to Congress talked a lot about sheep. I was like, oh, that's great. This has got to lead to somewhere. This has got to lead to a book.
Does that, when they shear them like that, does that go off in one piece?
Scott is so skilled that yes, it does. In fact, he likes to show that. He'll do that and then sit the sheep up, and you can see that it's got halfway, and then he flips it over and he gets it off pretty much in one piece. Now he then has to go and get the little bits like around the leg and the face. But yeah, it's just quite a thing to see. And it's really something to feel it too, to just take Buster's wool and fold it over and sink your hands into it. And of course, I'll help him out with bringing the sheep to him and then folding the wool and such. And boy, I could do an oil of Olay ad afterwards, because the lanolin just so wonderful how it moistens your hands.
What do you do with the wool from your sheep?
Do you want some?
I mean, y'all don't sell it, or?
We have 4 sheep and 2 Angora goats, and so it's not really enough to. So yeah, but what we do is I hold on to them, and sometimes we have people in the at the History Center themselves who have processed the wool. I should have thought to bring the nice cap that Erica made for me. Erica knitted. Erica loves Buster. He's her favorite sheep. Erica is our archives manager. And she made a knit cap for me. She made a sweater for herself. There's other members of our staff who've asked for fleeces. Oh, can I have a fleece? Sure. And then sometimes we've had, like my boss, Sarah Carter, will say, oh, here's someone who I'm dealing with who they'd like a fleece. And so I'll give it to them. And then also we have some to show for the children, the school children at the school programs, or for just regular events, because it's really something to see when you actually see this wool, actually sheared from the sheep. You have to see a fleece.
That's before it's been spun. They have to make that.
Yes, that's the thing. When I'm, Erica, here's a bag of raw wool. Now, remember, okay, it's come off the sheep, so there may be little bits of poop sticking on it, and there'll be lots of dirt and everything else, but when I gave it to Erica, she did the whole thing. She washed it, she carded it, she spun it, and all that work, washing, carding, spinning, what does that give you? It gives you a ball of yarn. Go back to that. Oops.
Right.
So, yeah. Oops. That's the blazer. That's not much help. Yeah. Oops. That's all that work just to get yarn, which is why, my book is about sheep in the United States, but expanding it, there's other books that talk about the significance of sheep in just the whole human experience and Western culture. And one of the key drivers of the Industrial Revolution, which began in England, was them figuring out, okay, here's ways we can speed up this process, getting the wool into actual finished cloth or clothing. It's sheep probably could say about Britain becoming a world power, and most of us have grew up very far away from England and we're speaking English. Sheep might say to you, yeah, we had something to do with that.
I've got a question. What about the native or the wild sheep? I mean, they don't have somebody shearing them.
They don't. Very good question. I'll hear that about our native sheep. I had the pleasure when I used to work at Zoo Atlanta of working with Lisa Smith, who's now the vice president at the Buffalo Zoo. And they have got an exhibit with bighorn sheep, our native sheep. And she told me how they shear them. When the sheep come in to the barn for the night, you go out with your leaf blower and blow it in the corner and gather it. Okay, because that's what happens with wild sheep, is that it just comes off. And I think the best comparison I can make across domestication is, some of you may know that the grains that corn and wheat come from, their ancestors, one of the problems was that you brush against it and all the kernels go flying. And so that was, over the process of domestication, one of the big things was getting it so those kernels would stay on the wheat and the corn, and humans have to come in to harvest them so you don't lose anything until you're ready for it. And that's what happened as part of the domestication of sheep, is just getting to the point that, that wool isn't going to come off without human help. It's like, I get people talk to me all the time about, oh, you saw that sheep in New Zealand that had escaped the shears. Yeah. That's like, there's so many examples of that in domestication where the animals have gotten to the point that, yes, they depend on us for that. And if we're not around to take care of that, they would have a problem.
I missed, where do the sheep live? Do you actually have a little spot by the History Center?
It's part of the Atlanta History Center. For those who haven't been, the Atlanta History Center is a 33-acre campus. We have the main building, And you go out the back of the main building, and we've got the Swan House, and we've got the Smith Farm, and we've got Historic Gardens. So yes, this is part of the History Center behind the main building. And it's funny how very often this will happen when I take the animals out for walks and we go around to the front of the museum. Do you live here? No, I work here. What about her? She lives here. The sheep lives here. Where? We've got a farm. You know, you got a farm? Yes. You know, just go into the museum and just because in front of our museum we have Brash Coffee and Super Jenny, which are two food operations that they use our space, but they're separate entities in that you can park and go in and get your coffee and soup without paying admission to the museum. But that's why you get people. I had people who just showed up a year ago and like, I didn't know there was a museum here. I just asked Google to give me a place to get a cup of coffee. And so, but yes, we have a farm. We've got sheep and Angora goats and chickens and turkeys, and there's the farmhouse itself and several outbuildings, an enslaved cabin and a blacksmith shop and a smokehouse. So yes, please plan to visit.
Isn't one of those structures? Didn't one of those structures come from Bartow County? Was it the corn crib, maybe?
Right. I think you know what? I think you're right. I think because it was both the corn crib and the barn. Because I don't remember. I'll have to look that up. I remember. Oh, they came from northwest of Atlanta, and I think, oh, this is northwest of Atlanta. So yeah. It was around.
And what did you say the lifespan of the sheep are? 15 years, like a dog?
Oh, Ida Mae, God bless her. Where are you, Ida Mae? There's sweet old Ida Mae. She's Hercules' mother. She came to us with Hercules as a lamb, and she passed away a couple of years ago. She was 14 and a half.
It's almost like a dog.
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, I love Buster and Hercules to death. They're 12 and a half now, so, I just relish the time I have with them.
And they don't bite normally. I've never heard of anybody get bitten by a sheep.
Yeah, I mean, they love peanuts. That's when I take them for a walk. That's their treat on the walk. And if you're not careful, thinking that part of your finger is part of the peanut. But as far as an aggressive action, no biting, because if a sheep has an issue with you, it's not this part of the head, it's this part of the head. It's just
They eat the whole peanut, I think.
yes, isn't that wonderful that their stomachs can digest them? Now Daisy, for the first couple of years we had her, she was a prima donna, and she insisted on having shelled peanuts. And I've never worked with a sheep or goat that insisted that her peanuts be shelled first. But finally, Daisy, as she matured, said, I'll eat the shell too.
Well, since their lifespan is about 15 years, what's the lifespan of a bighorn sheep?
Do you know what? I saw that the oldest recorded bighorn sheep made it to 19. And it's interesting because and I thought about that for a second and said, why would a wild one live longer than a domesticated? I think it's part of the trade-off in domestication is that you're getting these characteristics that are desired, but it might be in the long run shortening from what its lifespan could be in the wild. But on the other hand, my sheep don't have to worry that a mountain lion's going to take them down. So
Or they fall off a cliff?
that's that. Sometimes I read about that. A scientist had actually observed a bighorn lamb falling off a cliff, but it's like, it doesn't seem to happen much with the adults. When I worked at the zoo in Miami, we had several of the species of wild sheep and goats from Asia, and you can't have them in a chain link fence enclosure because just boop 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 up and over. Chain link is just perfect. This is better than climbing up a mountain. So that nice, evenly spaced. Yeah. I'm sorry, was there?
I got one last question.
Oh, you can ask as many as you like.
Well, I don't know.
I mean-
But I feel like it has to be Are sheep normally good natured or are they bad natured?
Fred, you don't have to answer that.
No, it's there are a few that are bad natured, but I have made sure that you know, because ours, we've had them since all our sheep and goats we've had since they were little lambs or little kids, and so you know, when Buster and Hercules came in, they learned really fast they were going to get a lot of love, and so they just grew up as these really, really sweet sheep. Yeah.
Now, do you have any disease problems like liver mouth disease?
Do not. In fact, a couple of times a year, I will get fecal samples. And of course, since I'm so fastidious and we have 4 sheep and 2 goats, I have to get a fecal sample from each one individually. I'm not just going to grab indiscriminately poop. I'm just going to get a sample from each of them, send it to the lab, and it's always negative. We usually have a couple of things in our chickens, but never in the sheep or goats.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I know I learned something. If you'll permit me, so as Bert mentioned, we do invite you to come out and visit Sheep to Shawl on October 25th. This was sort of a whet your appetite, if you will, to learn more about the process that Leslie and her groups will be here to share with us out in the alleyway. How many you got coming? Probably
10 spinners
10
and somebody talking about natural dyes and bringing samples of those. We'll be going from the fiber of the sheep, goats, and cotton all the way to finished yarn and some weaving and knitting demonstrations.
And since you said the magic word cotton, we talked about wool. We'll talk about cotton for a minute. We're auctioning off this beautiful cotton shawl that Leslie herself hand knitted. So raffle tickets are available now. We'll raffle it off the day of October 25th during Sheep to Shawl. It's a great way to support the museum. Tickets are $5 for one or $5 for $20. And you can meet the artist right here.
Hey.
Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you.
Can I just say as long as I've been working with sheep and I hear the word spinners, I still don't think of what you're doing. I hear spinners, and in my head it's one of a kind love affair, yeah.
We visited y'all quite a bit over the years. Enjoyed all the sheep to shawl.
Thank you. Thank